What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JAR. JAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. And we're here this week to talk about It's Time to Talk Commander 2016. Down below, it's just going to say Commander 2016 because that is way too much to put in a title. This story, It's Time to Talk Commander 2016, was by the Magic creative team. So it was not attributed to one specific person. Which is very interesting. I did a little bit of research today, so props to me, I guess, because I usually don't do that. But that is the first time, this is the first time that the Magic creative team collectively has been given the byline of a story since the wrap-up of Tarkir, the Tarkir block. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I guess before we get started, we'll do our typical... This story was super short. It's not even really a story. It's, if you guys have seen those books that like Marvel Comics puts out and DC Comics puts out, where it's like a compendium of all of the different characters that have ever come out in Marvel or DC, and it's just like a brief description of each character, like giving you a quick rundown of who they are, but you also get to see a picture of them. That's what this story is. And I guess it's meant to hype you up for Commander, and I think it works really well for that. So, because we're reviewing it and we're not, like, summarizing it really, I definitely recommend it. You go check it out. It's worth your time because it's not a lot of time, and because the art is fantastic on a lot of these cards.
Yes,
the characters are very interesting, and for a lot of them, it continues a story previously told, which is very interesting. So... or adds to a story previously told, I should say. So, very, very cool, I think. So, quick review from me, from Amy. Definitely worth your time. Go check it out. Then come back and watch our review of it. For those of you that are now back, welcome. Or just watching all the way through. So, what I thought was interesting about the Magic creative team aspect of it is that in the beginning, usually at the start of every story, there's a little blurb that kind of hypes you up for the story. This little blurb in the beginning hyped you up for Commander. And it was told from the perspective of one of the Magic creative team, multiple. It was like, it said, at one point it literally said, I, for one, am really excited. So it was clearly from one person's perspective, or, the collective's perspective. But it was interesting to actually...
I don't remember it.
That's fine. It was the opening blurb in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't rember it at all.
That's fine.
Actually.
So, what's interesting is
speaks to how great the characters seem.
And because it was so in depth, each character, like, first of all, fair warning, there were 20 characters discussed. So it's a lot, and yet it was short because it was like 4 or 5 lines about each character. It was really nothing, and in comparison to the weekly stories, it really was nothing. It was
super short.
Yeah, really nothing. And again, yet it gave you infinitely more images than most of the stories do. I mean, you got 20 different pictures, plus a card for the first Commander that was spoiled. And the way that they did it with this story was there are 5 different Commander decks. If you guys are not familiar with Commander releases, they do one. They've been doing one every year since, I did my research on certain things, 2013 or 2014-ish, around there. Yeah, it's relatively new. I mean...
I thought it was like...
I could be wrong on that. Let us know in the comments down below.
That's what I assumed.
I don't think it was as... long ago as 2010, maybe 2012, but I'm leaning towards 2013, 2014. But you guys can let me know in the comments down below.
It didn't seem that new, but
Right. So
I'm newer than it, so.
Yeah, so, and I'm not as familiar with Commander. I've purchased some Commander product. It's still sealed, to give you an idea of what that means. So I still have, I believe it's Commander 2014, sealed in a box. It's actually kind of right over there. But yeah, that's it. That's as far as I've gone with Commander. I've played a couple of Commander games just with decks that I've thrown together that are not good. I'm not that competitive. I'm a Vorthos more than I am a Spike. So that's just, how that goes. But this was great. And in fact, in the blurb in the beginning, they called out Vorthoses and gave,
I do remember
referenced us and said, for all of you Vorthoses, here's 20 characters now that some of them are brand new, some of them it's the first time you're going to see them on their own card. For example, off the top of my head, Ludovic got a card. We've seen Ludovic's Experiment and things like that where it's referenced Ludovic before. I was mentioning to Amy, or reminding Amy, that Ludovic was Geralf's
mentor?
Thank you, yes.
Good
word for it. Where Geralf, during the story that Geralf was in, Geralf was sending messages to Ludovic and saying, hey, what do you think? Look at this great stuff that I've been doing,
Right.
Like a little kid, like, oh, look how great I did. Tell me how great I did.
Yeah, but I don't really remember if Ludovic, ever answered it, or maybe he,
I think he did. He
didn't like it or something.
Yeah, he kind of responded and was like, whatever, I'm doing my own thing right now.
Kind of an asshole.
Yeah, and so, but Ludovic is one of the legendary creatures that was shown here. He's not a commander, but he's one of the legendary creatures. And Ludovic's Opus, which I thought was an amazing surname for a card.
Yeah.
I have it written down here. It is Crom Ludovic's Opus. How cool is that?
Yeah.
And it's a flying guy, and it was just so cool.
He's just in time for Halloween.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And he had 2 heads. It was just really, really cool. That's what Ludovic is supposed to be, like Dr. Frankenstein. And so Ludovic's Opus is like Frankenstein's monster, but more so. And they're, stitched together creatures or whatever. So very, very interesting to see those 2 things, or Ludovic really, coming forth, because he's somebody that we've heard about a lot. And they do that a lot in Commander product, I've found. Frey Elise was the most popular, I think, from the last set of Commander cards, where Frey Elise was a character who we'd heard about in the past, but we'd never seen before, and so she finally got a card. She's a Planeswalker, and a lot of people were like, oh my god, we haven't heard about Frey Elise in 10 years, and now she's just a card, a Planeswalker card, released in Commander. So, very interesting, and the thing with Commander is it's just so fun. The format is made to be really fun, but also the fact that they can just do fun things with the decks. The commanders themselves, they've said each of the commanders are 4 colors. And I know that's
awesome.
Right. And from a historian's perspective, it's not really a historian's perspective, but from my knowledge of the past, they tried to have 4-color creatures, legendary creatures, do well in the Nephilims, and they didn't go over well at all. It was just way too complicated. But Commander, right, exactly. Hence why I said it was way in the past. Nephilims were creatures that were 4 colors to cast them, 4 different colors, and they tried to make them a thing, and it did not catch on. People just didn't enjoy it. It didn't work. So those Nephilims exist, but they are, bad. So there were a couple of different kinds. But now, hopefully, they've found a good way. Usually they play test these things into oblivion, and they've done this, I think, especially with knowing that the Nephilims exist and are bad. Hopefully they've worked on this enough to make it work.
That they've taken that into account.
Well, and plus the fact that at least from my knowledge of it, and again, I'm by no means a Commander expert. This is just the story that we are reviewing today. As far as I understand it, Commander's mana bases, or Commander decks mana bases, are a lot easier to manipulate because you have so many different options from Magic as a whole. Now, you run into the problem with you can only have 1 of every card. It's a singleton format, except for basic lands. So if you want to run a fetch land, you can only run 1 Polluted Delta, for example, as opposed to a playset of 4. So it's a little bit more difficult from that perspective, but you have a lot of different ways of, you have 100 cards to work with. So you have ways of searching for things, and that's kind of, I feel like, the quintessential thing with Commander is trying to search your deck for all the things that you need, and
which is helpful.
Yes, and again, being able to get your Commander out there, which when these Commanders come out, from the one that they've spoiled and Commander spoilers that I've seen on the internet and that have just been spoiled leading up to this story, these cards are very impactful and just fun. You can tell it's just made to be fun. So And
which is something we appreciate.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, and reading through about these characters was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And learning about them. And
I like the variety that you have.
Yes.
Because, I don't know, I kind of felt like they were going to try to make them, like, pretty cohesive. And sort of, even if they're from different planes and things like that, sort of try and make them all pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I thought that, but I just felt like that's what they were going to do. And it's just nothing like that. There's a lot of variety.
They're so varied.
In the characters that, I don't even know what to say about it.
No, yeah, no, but I agree with you. There's a lot of variation in these characters, and I, as you can see, I'm looking at notes here. I had to write them down because there are 20 of them, and that's a lot. And so, but I will also point out that I mentioned it at the top of the show, that I thought it was interesting that there were some characters in here that were introduced that were kind of utilized to continue a story or to add on to a story, which I love. Going back to a story that's already been told and being able to add to it because there's, I don't even want to say a hole, because a hole would imply that it wasn't complete.
Right.
But
it already was complete, and now you get to keep going with it.
Yes.
That's the cool part about it.
And something to add to it where it's the kind of thing where you read it and you're like, wow, that was something that I didn't even have a question about, but now I've learned more about it.
Right.
For example, this story went heavily... I think it's very interesting. We just had Conspiracy recently. I mean, it's right over here. We just had Conspiracy Take the Crown recently. Playing Conspiracy Take the Crown, there were a lot of Theros cards in Conspiracy Take the Crown. A lot of Theros cards. And the reason for it, technically, is because they added the monstrosity mechanic to Conspiracy Take the Crown, and that was only in Theros, and so you had a bunch of them. But there were other non-monstrosity Theros cards in Conspiracy Take the Crown as well, and it was very prominent. I mean, you opened your cards and you were like, oh, wow, there are a lot of Theros cards here.
I remember being at the release and having somebody say, I felt like I was opening Theros.
Yeah, there are just so many Theros cards. And now in Commander, there are so many references to Theros. I mean, the first Commander that we see, and the one that is spoiled, is Kinios and Trio? I can't read your handwriting.
Yes, and Trio.
Trio of Miletus, which is on Theros. And so that's one of many. I mean, that's, and it tells the story, it tells a story from Theros. It talks about Miletus being taken over and it was being ruled over by enemies, and Kinios and Trio came together with a force and took back Miletus, brought it to prominence, and then the people of Miletus were so grateful that they allowed, but had those two, and had those two be in charge. That was one of many. They also referenced a lot of the gods, like they referenced Iroas, they referenced, see if I can, Crufix was in here, Kaideli, Chosen of Crufix was in there, who was like a seer. She had her eyes covered, and it talks about the fact that
she had 4 arms.
She did have 4, because she had two hands covering her eyes, and the other 2 were just at her side like normal arms. Very, very interesting. Again, just a lot of different varying characters.
She was like holding an urn or something. Weird.
That may have been a different character, but yes, they kind of do blend together. But yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was her.
Right. No, you very well may be right. I may be wrong. It's totally possible. It happens a lot. The other thing, so they talked about Theros a lot. Thrasios, Triton hero, is a merfolk or a merman, and he talks about, or in his story, it talks about Thassa, god of the sea. So you hear about Thassa, you hear about Crufix. There was one guy who worked for Athreos, I believe, who was the god of the dead. There were a lot. The other thing that they referenced a lot was Tarkir.
Yeah.
Just different characters from Tarkir. what I appreciated about Tarkir discussions was it did such a good job of, at least for me, maybe you agree or disagree, it did such a great job of bringing me back to that story. To the time traveling and what's in the past and what's in the present. Yeah. And that's so good because that story was incredible. Like, I think that worked so well, and it, personally, it is what made me want to get so entrenched in reading these stories and following the stories. I mean, the stories were good.
You know that Khans of Tarkir was really my first set where I started really wanting to read the stories.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Well, and because the story was, it just was incredible. It was so cool. Even the broad concept of it. Like, describing that concept to someone who would appreciate that kind of storytelling, that's just so cool. And so what I liked was reading about these characters and being brought back to that, where, you talk about the last of the Abzan. What's her name? Rayhan. It's difficult to understand the pronunciation, but we're trying. Because it's something that I want to get right, but I don't know it, so we're guessing here. But it looks like Rayhan or Rayhan to me. And she was the last of the Abzan, and it talked about when the Abzan kind of relinquished control to Dramoka, and Rayhan was not okay with that, and so Rayhan joined in during the Khan fall. They talk about Rayhan fell in battle protecting the other Khans during the Khan fall fight. Awesome. And the art for her is just her leaning back and yelling. Screaming, and she's so prominently featured, it's right up on her. It's so cool. So that's something where I didn't care about the particular battle of the Khan fall where, did this one person die protecting all the others because they all just die eventually. Right. So what did I care? I didn't. But as I mentioned, this just added to that, and you were like, that's really cool. It was a story that didn't need to be told, but now that it's been told, I'm happy that I've heard it.
Right.
Which is, again, a testament to the Magic Creative team. I mean, they did an amazing job with just even little snippets here and there. Now, we talked about the fact that there are going to be a few weeks. I unfortunately did not write down the name of the commenter, but I will say in our previous episode, which I'm sure at some point was linked at the top up here, in our previous episode there was a commenter, I believe his name was John. I could be completely wrong.
I don't remember either.
But
I'm sorry.
He left a comment. I'm really sorry. I usually like to thank those people in person. But if you go watch that other video, it's there. If you go check that other video, it's there. Where this commenter mentioned to us.
Leave it in the comments.
Yes, and again, and thank you so much. But they mentioned to us that on Doug Byers' Tumblr, he mentioned that last week's story was in fact the final story for Kaladesh. I almost couldn't remember the name. Wow. It's the final story. It was in fact the final story for Kaladesh.
Yes.
And the Ether Revolt story is not coming out until the end of November, which is a few weeks away. But again, same commenter alluded to the fact that there were about 5 weeks in between, and there are 5 commander decks. So now technically they've now taken up one of the weeks with this, but we shall see what happens there. We'll see if they're going to give us full stories for each deck, if they're going to give us little snippets of things. After this, I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think my problem is I hope that I don't get too bogged down with trying to remember 20 different characters that were just thrown at us. I am obviously going to give the creative team the benefit of the doubt because of the fact that following Kaladesh, they have just done an amazing job.
Absolutely incredible.
One of our biggest complaints recently with the stories had been that when they were getting towards the end, it felt like they were rushing.
Yes.
And yet last week...
Or leaving it unfinished in some way.
Yes. Either rushing...
Leaving something unfinished.
Yes.
To the point where you're like, wait a minute, this.
Yeah.
Not even like, they left, purposeful cliffhangers. It was just like, okay, they missed stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it just was never resolved.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a huge complaint of ours, and we've talked about that previously if you've been following along. But this time, when that story ended, if you watched last week's episode, which again, if you have not, I definitely encourage you to click up there and check it out. But we mentioned last week, and I think, Amy, you mentioned it more heavily than I did, but I fully agree, that this story, or that story, felt like it deserved to be the last one.
Yeah.
It was a great way to tie it all together. It was a great way to hype you up to want to read what happens in Ether Revolt. It just did an amazing job of all of that. And
because even if at the end of reading it, you could sit there and say, well, wait a minute, here's this little thing over here, and here's this tidbit that you didn't finish over here, and here's this one thing I'm thinking of here. You might still be able to say that, but after reading it, you don't care.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because they did a good job of wrapping things up in a more general sense.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's why I think more so I'm very willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on this story.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with this.
I'm always looking forward to see what they do. But
I am too, I think, but if you remember correctly, I mean, I think that when we read the Conspiracy Take the Crown stories, and we read that last one about Leovold, and then when we found out that the next story was going back to Kaladesh, or was, starting with the Kaladesh stories, I was just so disheartened.
Yeah,
because
I was pissed.
Yeah, and because, and
I was like, wait a minute, that story kind of stunk, because, it wasn't bad, it just didn't make you care about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was short. And then at the end of it, we didn't have any of our questions answered.
Right. Well, and because...
And then they just moved on to the next thing.
Yes.
And we were just like, what the heck?
Yeah. And because to me, it really seemed like that story was the kind of gathering together all of the loose ends so that the next week they could blow it all up, give you the final story, and actually close it out.
And it's like they just...
And then it never happened. It just
make it.
hung there. You never find out what happened. And so then when they were like, great, we're back to Kaladesh, I'm like, why are you in Kaladesh?
What?
Why didn't you tell us about this? So that, I think, leading into the beginning of Kaladesh, I mean, they did a great job of kind of smacking me around and being like, too bad, enjoy these stories.
Yeah, too bad, so sad.
Right. But these are great. And
yeah, and they were great.
Yeah.
They really were great.
Yeah. And so if you've missed us talking about Kaladesh on this show, I suggest you go back and watch it. It's definitely worth your time.
There's a JAR playlist, guys.
There sure is. I'm sure that was linked to the top somewhere as well. But seriously, I mean, not even for self-promotion. If you just want to go and read the stories, they were all worth your time.
Yes.
There was
every single one this time around,
yes.
I would say, was worth sitting there and reading.
Yes. And there were definitely some that were a lot better than others, but that's not to say that the ones that were lesser
there
were bad.
None that were not good. Like,
No.
I will say that the Leovold story was not good.
Yes, I'll agree with that.
But
I'll agree with that. And
I can't say that about any in the Kaladesh.
No. And I'll say even, the one that sticks out to me as well was the promised end for, Emrakul. The final story of Eldritch Moon was good, but in the grand scheme of things, when you step back, it was well written, but it was very rushed.
Right.
And when you step back and you look at it as a whole, that story does not hold up because it's missing a lot.
Yeah.
And so the Leovold story, I think, was just bad on its own, just because the storytelling didn't work.
I don't think it was bad on its own, but it had to literally be on its own.
Yeah.
Like you had to read no other stories, know nothing about any characters ever, and then be like, oh, cool story.
Yeah.
Because if you did, you were just like, okay, well, excuse me, no.
Yeah. So, long story short, there are good stories, there are bad stories. Kaladesh
recently hasn't really been any bad stories.
Agreed. Fully
That's
agreed.
Our point.
Well, and
let's circle back to it.
No, and I think the last bad story was, Leovold's Dossiers, which was the last conspiracy one, which, you know what? I've talked about this a lot,
but it was a conspiracy story, so it wasn't as pivotal. But it was the last story, so it was pivotal.
And
so it should have done a better job with it.
And it had built us up for 3 or 4 weeks to get to that point, and then it
Yeah.
just dropped and left nothing. So, Anyway.
This isn't about that story.
No, I was just going to say, we'll stop complaining about Leopold's dossiers, although I will link it at the top at some point so you guys can go check that out, because it was definitely an interesting experience to sit through that and read it. But
anyway.
No, but so I think that's my point, right, is that there are, as far as I can see, I mean, I guess there's more than two, but there's kind of two ways that these Commander stories can go. They've got a lot to live up to from following Conspiracy Take the Crown, where it was not good, right? It didn't end well. The other stories were interesting for Conspiracy. It didn't end well. And so for Commander, I think they've started off pretty well.
Yes.
This was just a taste, and it was just like, here are these characters. Be introduced to them.
Yeah, and it was
get
a nice
excited.
Orderly taste, so it wasn't like, oh, here's this sort of thrown together sloppy story that we're just incorporating these characters into so that we can explain to you about these characters.
Right, and I
feel like they did that one time, or something somewhat similar to that.
Fair enough.
And I'm happy that they didn't even try it with this one. They just gave us the information and we could just sit there and take it in. And
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just going to say, I truly hope that in the coming weeks, they don't try to do that.
Yeah.
They don't try to be like, oh, look, Ludovic just, on Innistrad just met with someone from Theros. Like,
yeah, because obviously they're not going to have 20 separate stories for each of these characters.
But they could still have some for each deck.
Right.
Who knows? And I'm okay with them kind of doing snippets of, like, this is Ludovic's part of the story. This is, the Theros people's part of the story. And, like, going step by step.
Done well is the point.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And, of course,
And the only reason why we get disappointed when it's not done well is because we see the potential that they can do.
Well, and I think...
so...
I think that, thankfully, with Kaladesh, they've been going in an upward direction.
Yeah.
And that's why my hope is that Commander doesn't tank it.
Yeah.
I think is my fear. And I don't want that to be the case, because even supplemental stories are still stories. I mean, they did something, as I said, they did something with this story that it was kind of necessary based on what they were doing. Usually these stories are told, if I'm going to get a little technical here with story talk, usually stories are told from a first-person omnipotent perspective. The Magic stories, meaning that they're being told kind of looking over the shoulder of a character at any given time and talking about how that character feels, what that character is thinking. So there's an omnipotent presence talking to you about that one character. In this story, they kind of had to do that about many characters, and yet they weren't talking from their perspective at any point, because it was just giving you an overview.
Yeah, it was
and
just
so
information.
Right.
Basically.
And so this was purely an omnipotent perspective, or a narrator kind of a situation. And so it's very different. Now, to be fair, a lot of, especially through the Shadows over Innistrad block, there were a lot of different storytelling ways that they utilized to get these stories to us. But this is I think one of the most different ways, and I think it's just because of the nature of the fact that they were just using the story to give you quick snippets about these 20 characters, introducing them, and I think we're going to have to reserve judgment. We'll see. This story was great. On its own, it was cool because it was just introducing new characters to you. They seem really interesting. I hope that it continues to be interesting and move us in the direction that we want to be, because we've got a few weeks with it, and we know that, going in.
That gives them a nice chance to be able to get some stuff done and hopefully not make it rushed like some of their other things were.
Correct. And it's supplemental product. Now, they went from Eldritch Moon, which was the ending of Eldritch Moon was subpar and left something to be desired.
Maybe for you.
They went into okay, but they did that. They then went into Conspiracy to Take the Crown, which the ending left something to be desired. And now they went into Kaladesh, which blew up expectations because it was just so amazing and incredible.
Yeah, and we just love it so much.
Every story was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, we came here every week, and as we've said, we are not above, talking about a story critically.
And we just stood there and we're like, oh, it's so great.
Yeah, it was so good.
And
you know,
this, and this.
Release is my favorite story in a long, long, long time. The one with the Johnny, amazing.
Well, you do love a Johnny.
Johnny is my favorite Planeswalker, yes, but that story was also incredible.
Yes.
So
it was very good. But I can't agree that it's the best.
Okay, that's fair. Do you wanna say what is the best? All right.
No.
Okay.
There are a couple that are definitely up there.
Okay.
I'm Avison, of course.
I'm Avison was spectacular.
Yeah, and then
the fight with Nahiri and
yeah.
It was Nahiri's Wrath and Campaign of Vengeance was that story. That one was also really good. But yeah, so Commander is where we're going. Hopefully it is good. I hope that it, as I said, it continues on the path of Kaladesh. Even if, you know what, even if it falters a little, I just don't want it to crash and burn.
Yeah.
It will really derail this kind of high that we've been on with Kaladesh. And
well, even so, I mean, maybe hopefully from a sort of objective standpoint, we can look at it and kind of compare it to the worst of other stories from other sets and say, hey, maybe it ain't that bad.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
It feels bad
it
because
can,
it's coming off of Kaladesh.
Yeah, it can falter a little, but I don't want the experience of hearing that Aether Revolt is beginning. I want to be excited when Aether Revolt comes out, and I don't want to be like, but you didn't finish the Commander stories. You know, I don't want that to ruin my Aether Revolt experience. And again, it didn't ruin my Kaladesh experience because Kaladesh was so good, but still, there was that moment that day when it was like, oh, Kaladesh stories are beginning, and I was like, why?
But
you didn't finish.
Though.
So, I reserve judgment. I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely optimistic about their abilities because they've been doing so well.
And we just want to see them continue to do well.
And as always, what do you guys think? Do you think that we're completely wrong? Do you think that...
You idiots.
Yeah. Do you think that Kaladesh was bad? Do you think that there were... did you think that Eldritch Moon was better than Kaladesh? Did you like the way Conspiracy Take the Crown story ended? Yeah. Let us know in the comments down below.
Maybe you were like, hey, Conspiracy was like, eh... And then, you know, that last story was so funny and it lighthearted and it was a good ending. You know, explain why it was good.
And that's...
So we can maybe see it from a different perspective.
Right. And in no way, you know, like Amy was joking about it, we are not going to sit here and be like, anyone who appreciated that story is dumb. Yeah. Like, no. Because everyone has their own opinions, everyone has their own perspectives, and that's the main reason why we tell you to read the stories first, because we want you to have that opinion, have that perspective, and then come to us so that we can give you ours, you can give us yours. That's the whole point.
We can discuss it instead of you just adopting our opinion because it's what you know.
Right. And so we will see where this goes. Please, if you are looking forward to Commander, again, let us know.
Leave that in the comments.
Yes, and
say,
also...
hey guys, what are you talking about? It's going to be so great. I'm so excited. It'll make us feel a little better.
And also, subscribe down below. You will find out when each and every jar talking about Commander, talking about Aether Revolt, comes out. I do not plan on purchasing this product. It is not randomized. It is all the same, so you can look up a deck list of these cards and see what you would get in each deck. If you're going to go out and purchase them yourself, which one are you getting? Are you getting all 5 or are you only getting 1? You know, let us know which ones. Is it a tough choice for you, or is it a slam dunk and there's just one deck that's better than the rest and has a True Name Nemesis in it? Because why would you ever do that? Why did they put True Name Nemesis in a Commander deck? It was the only one that sold. Anyway, True Name Nemesis. True Name Nemesis is incredible. Anyway, guys. thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. We appreciate any and all feedback you give us.
Yes.
There's a like button down below. There's a dislike button down below. If you hit either of them, let us know why.
Yeah.
As we said, subscribe. You'll find out when more of these come out. You can hear more of our crazy conversations and opinions and etc. analysis.
Ever-long, unnecessary banter.
Yes. And again, let us know what you thought of this episode, of other episodes. You can check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Those links are down in the description box below. From the Geek for All YouTube channel, guys, I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
Please don't forget to continue to show off your...
#Vorthos Pride.
And
I don't know why I sang it, but...
You always do that. That's your thing.
Always. No, don't.
Anyway.
It's a new thing.
Whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.